Hello! I took a 3D animation and modeling course, and I wanted to show off some of the things that I created. So I really wanted to get into creating games in the future, but I mainly have experience with 2D tools and game engines. So learning 3D was a bit of an endeavor, but it was also a fun learning experience. First, we had to come up with designs of the characters we wanted to create, and create some references and just general content to understand what we were trying to make. And I knew exactly what I wanted to make. I wanted to create my own character that I have on the internet. Before we learned to model our characters, we needed to come up with a character. And actually, I had one of my own characters that I wanted to model. This was one of my original characters from 2017. His name is Bruno. He was just like a dog character that I had. Back at the time, he didn't really have much traits about him aside from his physical look and that he always wore like a beanie, sweater, and scarf. However, trying to think of what he's based off of, what personalities and other traits that he'd have, it was interesting because I kind of took this character that exists to character that could actually be something that can be interacted with. And I really didn't have a breed in mind for what Bruno was supposed to be. I guess he was kind of like inspired partly by a beagle, but he also had like the curled tail of an Akita. His style was kind of actually, I was inspired by this artist called Okiel on DeviantArt from so long ago. Fortunately, most of their art is no longer there anymore, so I had to pull some random images from the way back. However, looking at other sources of dogs depicted in media, they generally have like a pronounced snout, and even when they're humanoid, they have like the pronounced snout, and sometimes they'll have like floppy ears on the side or ears that stand up. The second character that I wanted to model was Laszlo. Back in 2019, I really wanted to create an interesting character, and I thought that there aren't that many bat characters, so I really wanted to create a bat character. So I created Laszlo. Laszlo was kind of based off of Stella Luna a little bit, but I think it was also inspired from the design of Hotel Transylvania's, the ones Dracula, and I forgot what the daughter's name is, but when they turn into bats, I thought the design was cute. So he's sort of inspired by those designs. I really wanted to keep the wings mostly anatomically correct, and the rest of his body as well. However, feet generally pose a challenge because bats' knees actually bend in weird different ways, and the ways that bats move, bats don't really take off the floor. They tend to hang and drop to fly instead of land on the floor and take off from the floor. However, I found that might have been a limiting factor in Laszlo's design, so Laszlo tends to have flat plantigrade feet, so he can stand on the floor and interact with other characters rather than just hanging from a roof. I also found that it'd be interesting to have him kind of just use his thumbs to interact with different objects in the world. Looking at other references, I couldn't think of too many designs that had the right characteristics I wanted. I think Laylee from Ukulele was probably the closest of what I was thinking of, was the wings being very bat-like, and then the sum, and then the feet being very plantigrade. However, there are others, some other bat characters that I really liked was the Natural Habitat short. Had like a very simple design for the bat. It had very big ears, which I also kind of wanted to replicate, but I didn't realize bat ears were super large, so I guess I can actually enlarge the ears of my characters a bit. After coming up with the different traits of the characters and what I wanted to go for, I wanted to create reference models for the side and front views to help aid in the creation of the 3D models. And first we have Bruno. We have the front and side profiles, and this is generally based off of the image, the designs that I had from before. I kind of had to draw his body. Before, he always just existed in his sweater and beanie, but I felt like I needed to model his body to model the clothes over the body. So I started drawing the blue outline of his body, and then the magenta outline is his clothes, so that I can better accurately tell how things should look in the 3D modeling program. His tail kind of curves, and I didn't know at the time how I was going to do that curve, so it kind of intersects inside. However, later in the 3D modeling program, kind of just have it in a loop. I also drew a reference for Laszlo. Since there wasn't too much intersections, I just kind of drew him like that. I also made his ears a little bit bigger, and not much has changed from his design. I also had two other characters that I would have liked to 3D model. This was Nixon, and he's actually the second character that I created after Bruno. Nixon was a cat, which I thought would just be like the most basic dynamic character you could think of, a cat and a dog hanging around together. And then this was Mino, kind of like a companion to Laszlo, since Bruno and Nixon are fairly tall for compared to Nixon and Mino. Nixon and Mino are pretty short, and so as short characters together, they would have been able to hang out around each other without being towered over. They're all good friends, but it's nice to have two similarly sized characters interact with each other. After creating the references in Procreate, I imported them into Blender, and I started tracing the character and blocking him out, and I modeled him, and he looks kind of alright. I think it was a good first attempt for me. I intentionally kept the level of detail low on him because I wanted to see if I can put this in VR chat on the Oculus Quest, and they were recommending a low amount of polygon. However, I also added these modifiers to just like bump up the detail a little bit when animating on a PC. The next thing I did after that was we did the UV editing to create the textures, and his coloring is very simple. It's basically just his normal tan body with some brown highlights, and then his brown nose and black eyes. But after that, I went and started rigging my character, and I went a little bit crazy with rigging the character because I wanted to have the character in VR chat one of the steps to have your character in VR chat is you need to rig it. So I started creating a basic rig, a basic skeleton for VR chat that kind of consists of just a couple of the limbs, the spine, legs, and tails, and the ears, and a little bit of the eyes. But then when I tried to animate the character from scratch, I found that it's a little bit hard to play with the bones by themselves, so I actually saw a bunch of tutorials on using bone constraints to move bones using a set of handles, or I call them handles, I don't know what they're called, but now I can say move these bones, and that orients his head or where he's looking at. Have some bones that can control some shape keys, so I can control when he's blinking. We got some inverse kinematics on his arms and hands. I actually put a little bit of a bone in his palm, on the palm of his hand, so that he can kind of grab things. I'll show that a little bit later. And we got some inverse kinematics for the legs, they can step. I got a little constraint on here so I can actually lock it to the floor. And we have a handle here that handles like the natural lift off of the leg and the toes. And then these control like the hip and the chest area, both location and rotation. This hand is locked because it is currently enabled with the IK, but this one was not. Oh yeah, and I also have this thing to rotate his head. So it's just a bunch of these little bones that control the underlying skeleton. So the process of creating the character into a VR chat avatar was relatively straightforward after a couple of attempts. Basically, it involves just mapping the bones to Unity's kind of humanoid rig, and then you can kind of check and see whether things move correctly. I did notice that in Unity's fancy like humanoid rig thing, the fingers sometimes bend in abnormal ways, which I'm not able to reproduce that in Blender, but it seems like something that just happened in Unity and was transferred over to VR chat. But I'm still kind of happy with what came out. So we have my character here, and I also added physics to the tail and the ears, so like when you're in game, the tail kind of moves based on when you move, kind of based off of gravity. The same with the ears. And I had I made sure that this was well optimized to run on Quest 2. I even wanted to ensure that this runs on Quest 1, so I actually had very little polygons. I actually realized that I had to combine different meshes, so the eyes used to be two different objects in Blender, but I realized for better optimization you need to combine that into one object. Stepping into VR chat, you can see what I created. So the fingers are all tracked. Right now they just kind of move to what I have on the controller, but if I was using the Quest 2's finger tracking, they all individually move. The legs also move. I mean, granted, I don't have full body tracking, so they're kind of just
interpreted by the software. The ears kind of have like a little bit of physics. So when you bend your head, they kind of like fall down. And then it's a little bit hard to show, but the tail kind of wobbles as I move. See it when I move back and forth? Let's see here, if I kind of just do some expressions. Yeah, it's a little bit hard to try and show off the tail, but it does kind of like wiggle as you move. But that's my character in VR chat. It's really cool to actually play as your own avatar.
So I almost forgot two things that I wanted to show. I created a little bit of some furniture to go along with the character. First, I started creating this kind of chair, kind of like an office chair, a swivel chair. I kind of created this stand and some cushions, and they're connected by a handle, and kind of made this little gap here so that the character's tails can go through the chair rather than just be bunched up. I also created this table, and I was thinking they could probably be living in kind of like a dorm area, like as if they're all college students. So I was creating like a dorm kitchen. So I have just a counter with different with different cupboards and drawers that all open and are interactable. There isn't anything in here, but the doors and the drawers all open. Also made this oven, which also has doors and drawers that can open. Still nothing inside of it, but they're interactable. And then there's these knobs for the heat. And I was experimenting with Blender's spiral tools and curves to create kind of this heat coil for the stove. And then lastly, I created a fridge. Still isn't much in the fridge, but I kind of like how I made these handles. And then if I unhide the walls and stuff, we have walls with these little lip that you usually have on the bottom of the walls. We got the door frame, and the door handle actually rotates, and so does the door. You got the little peephole, the eye hole that you can look through. And there isn't really much outside the area. I was kind of just going too crazy with the rigging. But this was kind of the environment that I created. And finally I was going to show off how the kind of rig interact with objects. So remember the marker in the palm of the hand? I can actually lock the marker to like the door handle, and so I can turn the doorknob and the hand will move with it, allowing it to look like he's turning the door handle, and then as the door moves, the handle moves, moving his hand, and that controls everything. And that's the power of inverse kinematics.